She quiet for a second. Do you hear it? Not the noise, not the chaos, not the endless chatter in your head. Beneath all that, there's something else. A voice that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't fight for your attention the way the world does. It slips in between the cracks of silence, steady, patient, waiting for you to finally shut up long enough to notice. Everyone's so busy screaming their own thoughts, chasing their own noise, they miss it. But if you stop, if you actually listen, you'll realize it's been speaking all along. Silence is the doorway to clarity. The problem is, people are terrified of silence. They run from it like it's a curse. They fill every second with noise, music, chatter, scrolling distractions. Because they're scared of what they'll hear when everything else stops. Silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It's the place where the mind finally stops spinning in circles, where the truth sneaks out from the shadows. But most can't handle that, so they keep the volume high and wonder why they never feel clear. When you shut your mouth, when you stop rehearsing arguments in your head, when you let the world go quiet, something strange happens. The fog begins to lift. The noise you thought was part of life reveals itself for what it really is: interference. All those opinions, all those fears, all that mental static, it drowns out the signal. And the signal isn't weak. It's just patient. It won't fight to be heard. It waits for you to create the space. That's why silence feels so heavy, because it forces you to face what's been buried under the distractions. Clarity doesn't come with volume. It comes with stillness. It's the reason people who stop running for a moment suddenly realize what they actually want. They didn't figure it out because the answer magically appeared. They figured it out because the answer was always there. But silence was the only doorway that let them walk into it. Without it, the truth gets smothered. With it, the truth has room to breathe. But silence isn't easy. The moment you sit in it, the mind rebels. It shouts louder, throws old memories at you, digs up every doubt and fear, trying to keep the noise alive. It doesn't want silence, because silence exposes it. Silence strips away the excuses, the masks, the stories you've been feeding yourself. That's why people panic when things get quiet. Not because nothing's happening, but because too much is happening. The lies start breaking down. And what's left is the raw voice you've been running from. The doorway to clarity isn't comfortable. It doesn't always feel peaceful at first. It can feel like standing naked in front of yourself. No distractions to hide behind, no noise to cover your thoughts. But push through that discomfort, and clarity begins to emerge. Slowly, then suddenly. Patterns you couldn't see before. Answers you were begging for. Directions you kept asking about. They don't come from outside. They rise from within the silence. People think silence is wasted time, but it's the most productive thing you can give yourself. Because every step you take without clarity is wasted energy. You rush, you push, you fight. But if you're going in the wrong direction, it's all useless. Silence saves you from that. It opens the doorway to the map, to the compass, to the guidance you've been too noisy to hear. The minutes you spend in silence are the hours you save wandering lost. And here's the paradox. Silence isn't about nothing. It's about everything. Everything you've been running from. Everything you've been searching for. It's all there. But you have to walk through the doorway first. And the doorway isn't marked with neon signs or flashing lights. It's marked with stillness, with shutting up long enough to listen, with daring to be uncomfortable in the quiet. Clarity doesn't scream. It waits. It waits in the silence for the one who's willing to stop filling the air with their own noise. And when you finally step through that doorway, you realize it wasn't clarity that was hiding. It was you. You hid behind chaos, behind distraction, behind excuses. But silence strips all that away and shows you what's real. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Noise drowns the divine. That's the trick of the world. It keeps you busy, loud, distracted, so you never hear what's been whispering underneath it all. Every screen buzzing, every voice shouting, every thought racing. It's all just clutter designed to keep you deaf to the one sound that actually matters. You mistake the noise for life, but really it's camouflage, layers of static covering up the signal. And the signal doesn't shout over it, because it doesn't need to. It just waits, buried under all the chaos you keep inviting in. You wake up, and the noise starts before your feet touch the floor. Notifications, chatter, endless information flooding your mind before you've even had a chance to breathe. And then you wonder why you feel disconnected, why you feel empty. The divine doesn't fight through that chaos. It's not going to scream over the carnival you built in your head. If you can't silence the circus, you'll never hear the whisper. And that whisper has been there the whole time, steady, patient, unchanging. You just drown it every day with your addiction to sound. Noise is seductive. It makes you feel alive, makes you feel like something's happening. Music blasting, conversations buzzing, opinions flying. There's a rush in it. But the rush is empty, hollow, temporary. And when it fades, you're left with silence again. Only now it feels heavier, scarier, because you've been avoiding it for so long. So you run back to the noise, convincing yourself it's comfort, when really it's poison. Noise doesn't fill you, it hides you. The divine doesn't come with drama. It doesn't need flashing lights or surround sound. It comes in the quiet space between your thoughts, in the pause between your words, in the moments you actually shut up long enough to notice. But most people never get there because they can't stand still long enough. They want thunder and lightning, not whispers. But the truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. It just needs you to be still enough to hear it. Noise drowns it, and not just the external noise. The internal noise is worse. The endless self-talk, the arguments you replay, the fears screaming in your head. That noise is the loudest of all. You're so busy listening to your own chaos that you can't hear the voice that cuts through it. And that's the tragedy. Because it's not that the divine isn't speaking. It's that you won't shut up. The moments of clarity people describe, the breakthroughs, the sudden peace. It's not that something new appeared. It's that, for once, the noise stopped long enough for them to notice what was already there. That's why so many hear it in nature, or in the middle of the night, or in a deep pause after chaos. Because those are the rare moments the noise finally dies, and in the silence, the whisper comes through. Not because it arrived, but because it was always waiting. Noise makes you deaf to truth. It keeps you running, keeps you distracted, keeps you from ever sitting with yourself. Because if you did, you'd realize the answers you've been chasing in the noise were never in it. The answers were under it. And that's the cruelest trick. The more noise you invite, the further you drift from what you're actually searching for. The divine doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. It doesn't chase. It waits. And as long as you keep flooding your life with noise, you'll mistake the static for reality. You'll live half-deaf, chasing voices that mean nothing, while ignoring the one voice that means everything. The world screams, the divine whispers, and only the one who silences the world will ever hear it. Stillness sharpens the inner ear. People think hearing is just about sound, about vibrations bouncing off the drum inside your head. But real hearing goes deeper than that. It's not your ears that struggle, it's your attention. You've trained yourself to pick up noise, to grab the loudest, flashiest sound in the room. But you've forgotten how to listen beneath it. That's where stillness comes in. Stillness doesn't just quiet the outside. It tunes the inside. It sharpens the ear that doesn't live on the side of your head, but in the middle of your soul. Most people never train it, never even notice it exists, because they're always in motion. Running, chasing, talking, filling their time with movement so they don't have to feel the weight of sitting still. But in the absence of motion, perception expands. Stillness pulls back the curtain on things you couldn't catch when you were too busy running. The whispers get clearer, the signals get sharper, like a radio finally tuning into the right frequency. The broadcast was always there. You just never stopped long enough to hear it. There's a danger in stillness too, because it removes the excuses. When you stop moving, you stop blaming the chaos around you. You can't say, "I didn't hear it because the world was too loud." Not when the world goes quiet and the noise is only inside you. Stillness exposes what's been drowning in your own head, the clutter you've been avoiding. And when it clears, when the storm settles, what's left is raw, undeniable truth. That's why stillness feels uncomfortable at first. It strips away the masks you use to distract yourself. But the discomfort is temporary. Push past it and stillness becomes a weapon. It cuts through the static, slices apart the illusions, makes every whisper stand out with precision. The inner ear sharpens like a blade, and suddenly you're hearing things you missed for years. Guidance in the smallest nudge. Clarity in the simplest thought. Direction in what felt like emptiness before. The world didn't change. You did. You tuned in. It's almost funny how desperate people are for signs, for confirmation, for guidance. They pray for it, beg for it, demand it. and then drown it out with their own noise. Stillness is the answer they avoid because it requires discipline, patience, surrender. But the sharper your inner ear, the less you need the world to scream. You don't need a burning bush. You don't need thunder in the sky. You catch the whisper before it fades. You sense the shift before it becomes obvious. That's the power of stillness. It gives you early access to the truth, and the world hates it. The world thrives on your noise, on keeping you distracted, on making sure you never sharpen that ear. Because if you did, you'd stop being manipulated by volume. You wouldn't chase the loudest voice, the biggest crowd, the flashiest distraction. You'd know the difference between noise and signal. Stillness trains you to hear the subtle, the authentic, the real, while everyone else keeps mistaking chaos for direction. The inner ear isn't physical. It's that sense deep inside that recognizes resonance, that knows when something is true, even before you can explain why. But it only sharpens when you sit in the quiet, when you let the storm die down. And once it sharpens, it doesn't go back. You can't unhear the difference. Noise becomes obvious, fake voices ring hollow, distractions lose their grip. You start moving differently, not because the world changed, but because you finally trained yourself to hear what matters. Stillness doesn't just sharpen, it transforms. It takes you from being a slave to noise into someone who can cut through it like glass. And in a world addicted to sound, that kind of clarity is power. The quiet holds the answers. Funny how people search everywhere. Books, screens, other people's mouths, hoping to stumble on the solution to their mess, when half the time it's been sitting in the silence they're too afraid to enter. Answers don't like being shouted. They don't live in the chaos. They hide in plain sight, in the quiet corners where nobody bothers to look. And the irony is, the harder you search out there, the further you drift from what's waiting in here. Think about it. Every time life twists you into knots, your first instinct is to ask someone else, to drown your confusion in advice, in noise, in endless options. And what happens? You get even more tangled because everyone throws their version of the truth at you. Their fear, their bias, their broken lens poured into your ears until you're carrying their noise on top of your own. But the quiet doesn't confuse. It doesn't add to the pile. It strips things down, takes the layers off, and leaves you staring at what's real. The quiet doesn't flatter you. It doesn't tell you what you want to hear. That's why people avoid it. In the noise, you can choose the voice that comforts you, the one that feeds your excuses. But the quiet doesn't play games. It doesn't negotiate. It tells you what you already know, but don't want to face. That's the cruel kindness of silence. It doesn't invent answers, it uncovers them. The ones buried under fear, under denial, under the endless distractions you use to avoid the truth. People say they can't find clarity, but what they really mean is they don't like the clarity they've already found. Because deep down in the quiet, you know. You always knew. You just didn't want to admit it. The job you should leave, the relationship that's rotting, The dream you've been too scared to chase. The answer was there, whispering in the quiet. But you drowned it out with everyone else's noise, hoping maybe someone would give you a different version of the truth. But the quiet doesn't rewrite reality. It just hands it back to you raw, without sugarcoating. That's why the quiet feels heavy at first. It's not because it's empty. It's because it's full. Full of the answers you've been dodging. Full of the direction you begged for, but didn't really want. Full of the truth you tried to bury. And once you sit in it long enough, it starts to break through. The pieces click. The confusion untangles. The thing you thought was so complicated suddenly looks simple. Not easy, but simple. The quiet isn't complicated. It's honest. The world doesn't want you to believe that. The world wants you hooked on noise, forever searching, forever distracted, forever blind to the fact that the answers aren't out there. They're in the silence you won't touch. Because if you figured that out, you wouldn't need the noise. You wouldn't need their voices. You'd know where to go, what to cut, what to build, what to leave behind. And once you know, you can't be controlled. That's why silence is dangerous. It frees you. The quiet holds the answers, but it won't chase you. It won't throw itself in your face. You have to go to it. You have to choose it. You have to risk being uncomfortable long enough for the truth to surface. And when it does, it doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes like a whisper you can't unhear, like a truth you can't deny. And that's the point. You don't need noise when the quiet has already spoken. Listening is harder than speaking. Anyone can flap their lips, spill words like confetti, make noise just to feel alive. Talking is easy. It's control. It's distraction. It's a way to keep the spotlight on yourself, so you don't have to face what's lurking in the silence. But listening, real listening, that's a different game. That requires shutting down your ego, muting your excuses, and actually letting something outside of you seep in. And most people can't stand that. They don't want to hear. They want to be heard. That's why the world is a chorus of voices and almost no ears. Everyone's shouting over each other, competing to be the loudest, the cleverest, the most convincing. But in that frenzy, nobody's really listening. Not to each other, not to themselves, not to the whispers that could save them if they just pause. And it's no accident. People avoid listening because it's dangerous. It forces them to face truths they'd rather bury. When you listen, you don't control the narrative. You receive it. You give room for something you can't edit, can't spin, can't twist to fit your comfort. Listening requires surrender, and surrender feels like weakness to people addicted to noise. They think silence makes them small, that not talking strips them of power. But the opposite is true. The strongest person in the room isn't the one barking orders. It's the one who's still enough to catch what everyone else missed. The one who lets the noise pass, filters through it, and hears the one note of truth ringing under all the chaos. That's power. Not the volume of your voice, but the precision of your ear. But listening is hard because it demands patience. And patience doesn't sit well with a world built on instant reactions, instant gratification, instant everything. Everyone wants answers yesterday, so they fill the gap with words, with chatter, with guesses. They'd rather talk themselves into circles than wait long enough for the right answer to arrive. Listening feels like doing nothing, but it's not. It's a discipline, a weapon, a skill sharper than any voice. Because when you truly listen, you hear what others miss, and what you hear you can use. The divine doesn't waste words. It doesn't flood your ears with endless chatter like people do. It drops pieces, whispers, fragments, enough to guide, but only if you're paying attention. That's why listening is so rare. Most people are so busy rehearsing what they're going to say next that they miss what's being said to them now. Their mouths outrun their ears, and they wonder why they feel lost. Listening isn't just about sound, it's about presence. It's shutting down the performance in your head and actually stepping into the moment. And when you finally do it, when you really listen, everything changes. You hear the tone behind the words. You hear the meaning in the pause. You catch the thing unspoken, the thing hidden under the surface, the thing no one else noticed because they were too busy running their mouths. Listening sharpens you. It makes you dangerous. Because once you hear what's real, you can't be fooled by the noise. But it's hard. Harder than speaking. Harder than shouting. Harder than filling the air with your own voice. Speaking feels like action. Listening feels like surrender. And most people are too afraid to surrender. They're terrified of what they might hear if they stopped long enough to notice. Because once you hear it, you can't pretend you didn't. And that's why listening is rare, because the truth it delivers isn't always the truth you wanted.